I'll be hearing it all day.
Fuck yeah. Shit.
Fans, welcome back for another week of the 531, where we take your top 5 list on a particular subject, vote it down to a top 3, and then debate it down to a top 1. And Dave, this is going to be a lot easier than last week's, right?
Oh man, everybody was so hot to trot and excited to do this, man. Randy Savage matches. Hogan, he's polarizing. You know, he might be the bigger icon, but when it comes to like our hardcore fans, they love Randy Savage. They love the in-ring work. They love the persona. And can you blame them?
Now, let's start first with Macho Man Randy Osga. He's got Savage versus DDP, Great American Bash 97. Savage versus Flair, WrestleMania 8. Savage versus Steamboat, WrestleMania 3. Savage versus Sting, Spring Stampede 1998. Savage versus Shawn Michaels for the WWF Championship for 1992.
Oh.
And he's got an honorable mention.
Okay, let's hear it.
Savage versus Strange Brew. It never happened anywhere.
No, of course it didn't. That's pretend. That's magical. AJ will appreciate that.
AJ will love it. If only we could have given this list to AJ so we could have popped for that.
He was almost here, folks.
Randy, it was so close, but no cigar.
He had some make-a-wishes he had to do. So unfortunately, he couldn't quite get here. Well, I got Mike Flynn.
Otherwise, it's a solid list. I do want to say that.
Yeah, it was a solid list.
Steamboat, Flair, two of his better WWF matches.
The one with Shawn is interesting, too. I don't know. He gave us the date, but I'd be interested in what event that was from. I feel like that's probably a Coliseum video thing. He'll get to it when he hears this. But
and I was surprised to see a couple WCW ones on there, but Randy's always good for getting us like a variety of lists, and
he is
getting like usually a deep cut in there as well.
He is. I got my man Michael Flynn. He's got Savage and Flair for Mania 8, Savage and Steamboat Mania 3. I feel like this is going to be a pattern with those two. He's got Savage versus Brett, Saturday night's main event in 1987. That's a good one. Savage versus DDP, Halloween Havoc 97, and Savage versus Warrior Mania 7. I'm going to have to say Savage gave Warrior his best match, by the way. That was well done.
Nice. Now, I've got Jesse from New Hampshire. Obviously, WrestleMania 3 is going to pop up on here. Savage versus Steamboat. Savage versus HBK, UK Rampage, 1992.
Oh, was that April? Did you say? That's what Randy put, April 92. So there you go.
That could be that.
All right.
Spoiler alert. I have the same match, but not sure when it came from. He's got Savage versus Hogan, WrestleMania 5. Yep. Savage versus Warrior, WrestleMania 7.
Nice.
And Savage versus Flair, WrestleMania 8.
Yeah, man. Well, we're getting the pattern here, huh?
Yeah, I think it's going to be maybe a little more exact than our Hogan was last week because, you know, Savage, there's a couple matches he had that just stick out in a lot of people's minds. Hogan, it's like some people like his later NWO work. Some people were a fan of even the
golden era.
NWA, yeah. And for me, it was just classic WWF.
I got Mikey and Fred from the Facebook page. He's got, get this, Savage versus Steamboat, WrestleMania 3. Savage versus Hogan, WrestleMania 5. Savage versus HBK, April 19th, 92. I love our fans. You're making me want to go seek out this match now. Savage versus DDP, Halloween Havoc 97. And of course, Savage Flair, WrestleMania 8. Not surprised we're seeing those Savage Flair, Savage Steamboat matches make the list. They're very good.
That's the second time Savage DDP has popped up from that Halloween Havoc.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because Randy had the match earlier in the year, the Great American Bash.
He did. And spoiler alert, I have a match with them too on a different pay-per-view. So
you're making me think that this Savage DDP feud from 97 is worth going back and checking out.
It is. Oh yeah, no, that's actually DDP's best work, I want to say. Unlike Warrior, DDP had other great matches and stuff. But That Savage DDP feud is what really put DDP on the map. And besides, obviously, doing what he did with the NWO. But I mean, Savage got DDP to that next level right before the world title. And Savage, again, I will say this too, he gave Warrior his best match. Now, here's the interesting thing about Randy Savage. And it's talked about this too. Steamboat's talked about this. He didn't just call it in the ring. Savage was meticulous, and he had to go over every single thing. It was only the $1 Million Man, Ted DiBiase, I heard of a story, because he could not do that. And he told Randy, he says, I can't do that. He's like, do me a favor. He's like, let's just call it in the ring. And he says, we can have your stuff as a backup. And if anything goes wrong, we'll try it then. Will that work? And Elizabeth basically had to kind of coach him and go, okay, come on, Randy, that could work. And Randy was like, okay, fine. So that's how Randy was. So Randy wasn't a guy who called it in the ring like a lot of older wrestlers like to brag about, but Randy also got the job done, and Randy had excellent matches. So I would like to say that devil's advocate and a good argument for, hey, you know what? If you want to rehearse everything, maybe it's not what you want, but you know what? Good wrestling's good wrestling. And Randy Savage always had good wrestling. So
yeah, and doesn't that show what kind of a mind he had for it, that he got to a good match as well, but he was just on one end of it where it had to be planned out versus just going in the ring and pulling it off.
Yeah, he was also obviously very obsessive, and we didn't know the man personally, but from the stories, a very controlling person. We've heard about his stuff with Liz, but that kind of personality that obsesses about everything, about details, about his, his persona. That it's not surprising that given his athletic ability, the history of his father and everybody in the business, that he was going to be a superstar. He wasn't going to be denied.
Yeah, father ran a promotion down there. And I mean, obviously, that's how him and his brother got into the business.
Also in the Guinness Book of World Records for most consecutive sit-ups, Andrew Paffa.
Wow.
There you go.
Now, the next list I got, Scott from Voluntown, Savage versus Steamboat, WrestleMania 3, Savage versus Flair, WrestleMania 8, Savage versus Brett, Saturday night's main event, 1987, Savage versus Warrior, WrestleMania 7, Savage versus Hogan, WrestleMania 5.
Yeah, a lot of matches are popping up here off and on. I will say, so far to me, the two most consistent ones are Savage, Flair, and Steamboat. But boy, those Warrior and Savage matches are sneaking in there a lot too, huh?
I mean, Warrior Bret Hart, that Saturday night main event, got mentioned a couple times.
Mm-hmm.
Probably gonna get mentioned one more at least.
Oh God, I'm looking right now ahead. I got Zach St. John here. He's got that Bret Hart match from Saturday night's main event, November 1987. He's got Ted DiBiase, WrestleMania 4, and I love this one. I told him this. He's got Dynamite Kid from the Wrestling Classic, the first ever WWF pay-per-view. Might have been maybe the closed circuit, but whatever. One of their first big events. And it was pay-per-view. Ricky Steamboat, WrestleMania 3. And actually, he's one that didn't have Flair 8, but he's got Savage Steamboat Mania 3, so that's staying on there. But he's also got DDP Halloween Havoc 97. So,
wow, I'm surprised how much that's popped up. I mean, maybe I've just blocked that era of WCW out of my mind.
It's kind of in that spot where there was still really good stuff, but it was also right before things were going to eventually get bad in 98. So. It's interesting because if you think about it, 97, the end of 97 with Hogan and Sting was the first time they met. That was all the great creative that got us there. But then it was that horrible shit finish with Hogan and Sting. And then it's not long, 98? That's when WWE really starts to take over at WrestleMania. The ratings start to turn in April, so about 5-6 months later. So...
yeah, so who do you got for a list next here?
I got brother Jake St. John. Oh, yeah.
Who got us a list this week. Friend of the show, author. Can't wait for that new book.
Refuse to do Hulk Hogan, brother. Will not put Hulk Hogan over. No way, no how. But Macho Man, yeah.
Tell me Jake enforces the Jake rule with his Savage list.
He does not. He's going to give us straight. He's going to give us Steamboat Mania 3. Flair Mania 8, right? Where Zach dropped Mania 8, Jake picked it up. He's like, hold on, Jake, you forgot something. He's got Jake Roberts from Saturday night's main event with Randy Savage. That's a good one. That's heel versus heel. That was very rare. That would happen back in the
And
days.
that was the snake biting Macho Man, right?
No. I don't think so. This is the heel versus heel Intercontinental title days. That would be later. That was unless he's talking about that one. I thought that might have been. I don't know. Now you got me wondering. But yes, that feud that would go on.
Either way, we'll give it up to that feud because I didn't even think about Jake Roberts when I was doing this list. But then right when you said it, I got that thought and I'm like, how did I not include the snake biting Randy Savage?
Yeah, well, to me that they didn't have like their matches weren't as good as these other matches, but from a as far as a storyline went and an angle went, oh, it's one of the most famous storylines he's ever been involved in. That angle where the snake bites his arm, still, like kids today are still scared. Like they're grown adults now that have like problems because of that.
Oh yeah, I was watching the Rude Savage feud from last night. Or Jake Roberts and Rude.
Okay, the one where Jake's wife's in the audience.
Yeah, because it was almost like they were debuting the Rude kissing gimmick, and I was like, holy shit, like watching these old WWF sets is bringing me back to like I remember these now as iconic moments, but then as you see it play out, you're like, holy shit.
Yeah, it's that the Rude Awakening with the kiss had been done, but this was the first time there was anybody who rejected Rude at all. And we were like, what the hell's going on here? And then this was the whole thing where her husband, they set it up so beautifully. Now you got me remembering it. So they set up so beautifully where she's like, my husband would be mad. And they're like, oh, you got a husband, and Rude's such an asshole. And they're like, he works here. And they're like, oh, what is he, an usher? And they're like, he's a professional. They're like, oh, and then was he one of the ham and eggers we just beat? And then it's like Jake and then he loses it. The idea of even hearing Jake the Snake, well, you would hang out, and she slaps him. And then here comes Jake, and the fight's on. And then the stuff they were getting away with, Rude's wearing those tights of his wife on his face right in the front where his dick is. Oh, my God.
I saw ones where it was like his hands. It was supposed to be her hands that were either like on his ass or like framing his thighs on the front. And I was like, Jesus, like such a classic angle. And it's so wild to see it again as an adult when you're like, oh, shit, they can't do this stuff on TV. No.
Yeah, they were family then too, but they would once in a while push it. And,
Rick Rude would have been canceled quicker than David Starr.
He would have been Me Too'd a few times there.
Oh yeah.
To finish up this list, he's also got DiBiase Mania 4 and DDP Great American Bash 97.
Wow. Now I'm gonna bring you my last list because it's gonna be all the greatest hits. Savage versus Steamboat WrestleMania 3, Savage versus Flair WrestleMania 8. Savage versus Hogan, WrestleMania 5. Savage versus Hart, Saturday night's main event, 87. And because I needed a number 5, I stole Savage versus HBK, UK Rampage 92. That's why I don't know where the fuck that came from. Good to me. Savage versus HBK just sounds like a solid match.
Yeah, it's funny to hear the Savage matches with like HBK and Bret Hart because Savage was obviously at a different point in his career when some of those matches took place. But again, two of the all-time greats in WWF history. And there's Randy Savage right there with that era, right there with Hogan. I'll just jump right into my list. I got Savage Steamboat Mania 3. It's one of the greatest matches of all time. Savage Flair WrestleMania 8. I think this is Flair's best match in WWF, like, period. I just think Flair and Savage had awesome chemistry together. I have DDP Savage, but from Spring Stampede 97, which also, I believe, was the No Holds Barred match they had. And then I have Ted DiBiase, the WrestleMania 4, because it was so iconic to me. Savage getting his first world title, dropping the elbow on DiBiase. Just awesome stuff. And I got Warrior 7. I was a little warrior. I'm one of the few that will admit that. And I just was back in the day, the music and everything. And I think looking back at the stuff with Warrior, clearly he wasn't really good. But if you look at one match that maybe holds up because of the story and because probably the guy was meticulous about everything they did, it was Randy Savage. So that made my list.
Nice. Now that I'm looking at our top 3, Savage Steamboat, obviously.
Savage Flair.
Savage Flair.
Yeah. And then you got so many DDP matches. Did they dilute each other though? Because we all picked different events.
Great American Bash was in there twice.
Yeah.
What was the other one? Halloween Havoc was in there twice. You had Spring Stampede.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Savage Hogan made the list a few times. It's not on my list, but it definitely made people's lists. I mean, other than that, it's like, okay, so Savage Hogan,
Savage Hogan on there because either way, that third one's gonna get knocked off.
It has to get knocked off.
In there.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's it. You're getting knocked off. So let's just get right down to it. Savage Flair, Savage Steamboat.
I'm only picking Savage Flair because I remember the lead up to it. I remember the WWF magazine that
she was mine before she was yours, Randy. And I can't wait to kiss them moist lips.
And it's like, while Savage Steamboat is a classic, like there's just something about that Savage Flair that it got me into this day. It's like, that's my angle.
Yeah. I think it's underrated. I don't think it gets the credit it deserves. Our audience obviously did, and it's a good match, but everybody always talks about that Savage Steamboat match as one of the greatest. Al Snow was interesting when we had him on. I know he said in other interviews, and I've quoted it before, where he talks about Hogan Andre was the great match because from a business standpoint, it drew the money. And he's right, obviously, and he knows way more about wrestling than any of us do. But it is funny, right? Because you do also, it is great in that it's like people still talk about that Savage Steamboat match, though. That's the one people go back and watch, and it's right there. And on a card, it had so many matches. If you go back and look at that card, besides Hogan Andre, what's the one that gets brought up still? Savage Steamboat.
And it's a work rate match in a company that's not known for that work rate. So like it sticks out that much more as like a WWF match that you know.
It's a toss up. I really like the Savage Flair match. I have a hard time with this. I'm gonna go with this though.
Hey, Kane became the best masked wrestler, so I think if Savage Flair wins this and somebody's hurt, they could show up.
You know what?
I think AJ would probably pick Flair because he's such a Flair mark, and
he is. You know, you talked me into it. I was gonna say if we go by the votes as a tiebreaker, I think technically Savage Steamboat was on every list, whereas I know one person at least didn't have Savage Flair. So
let's give it to Savage Steamboat then. If everybody voted for it, I'm going with obviously the angle that like I was
right. Yeah, you know what? And Savage and Jake the Snake only made one of these lists, if you think about it, but maybe two. But that was one of the best angles of all time, right? So if we had a list that said greatest Savage storylines, this would probably be a different list. So, but Savage.
Yeah,
Steamboat.
and I'm Dave. You know what the music means. Savage Steamboat won it this week, and guys, we'll join you again next week for the Working Fans podcast.
Freak out.